amazing Super Bowl. You know, it was a good Super Bowl. Great football a little bit. You know, I wanted the Bengals to win because Joe Burrow, LSU. But let's talk about the real story. The amazing halftime show that it gave something that any other halftime show didn't give. And a little shady under T, that kind of show was supposed to take place in Atlanta when the Super Bowl was in Atlanta.
Right.
Now, remind us who performed in Atlanta.
I believe it was
Maroon 5, wasn't it?
Maroon 5. Yeah, because that was when Colin Kaepernick started taking the knee that started the whole thing, and the original performers pulled out.
Oh wow, I totally forgot about Look, y'all, I didn't know if the Los Angeles or the St. Louis Raptors, St. Louis Raptors.
The St. Louis Raptors.
I don't know football. Okay, that's not what I personally I didn't even tune in. I watched the halftime show on YouTube because I'm sorry, just football. That's not just me. Okay, but I will have to say that I very much enjoyed this halftime show. I was thoroughly always involved. Loved the sets, the vocals, the raps, everything. It was, first of all, let's just talk about all of those people on there. They are like from the 90s, early 2000s, and they are still selling it out, still doing it, and they are representing a culture where people usually count out, which is rap. First of all, let me just put some respect on rappers' names. Rappers are usually, and have been since the inception of rap. They are usually the smartest musicians. Why? They usually write their own lyrics. They usually produce their own stuff. So therefore, they are in control of what they produce. While other artists usually have writers and producers and thousands, and they don't own their stuff. They don't own it. Rappers was one of the first artists to do that. So let's put some respect on rappers, because right now, a lot of people, as a music teacher, asking, what did you think about the Super Bowl? I thought it was great. This is the music that I grew up on. Oh, well, that's not the music I grew up. I didn't really know what they were saying. And y'all didn't. Well,
maybe find the song, look up the lyrics. There you go. You can read them. You can see how many words they bleeped out for no reason.
I will also say, just for people who may not have watched it, the performers were Dr. Dre, Snoop Dogg, Eminem, Mary J. Blige, Kendrick Lamar, and also 50 Cent was also up in there too, right?
50 Cent. Hey, he hung from the rafters. He said, "I'm here. I'm Batman."
I love his little entrances upside down. But can we just talk about the reason? Like, first of all, Dr. Dre, LA, West Coast. Okay.
Him and Snoop starting it. That was it. Especially if you watch the Super Bowl, you saw the LA handprint on his hand. Smack down. He started to rise up with his soundboard, which he's famous for, because he's produced so many people, he's raised so many people in this industry, and then you cut straight to the Compton and Inglewood stuff with him and Snoop Dogg. And once that song kicked off, I jumped off of my sofa. I said, "It's here. We're here. Bring it."
Talk about the culture. First of all, the dancers out there crip walking.
Crip walking. Snoop Dogg was doing.
Yeah, here we go for the culture. And yes, you talking about gangs, whatever. Shut up. This is for the culture. And this LA West Coast, that is what it is. Okay, LA West Coast. There was a person that I thought would be there, but this is going into my argument. How people is like, this is political. Yada, yada. If they wanted to be political, you know who they would have brought out? Ice Cube, NWA, baby.
What up?
If they really wanted to be political.
Well, Anthony, we can't be political anymore because they bleeped out Popo. Why is Popo a word to be bleeped out?
It's
Really?
connotation around the word police, apparently, is what they were saying.
They should have brought Ice Cube out. But did also, let's pay our respects, RP Tupac when California.
California Dreaming.
Oh,
Yes, I mean, again, like that was West Coast, and honestly, when we were talking about West Coast, that's why I was kind of confused when I saw 50 Cent and Mary J. Blige. Which, mind you, I love 50, love me some love Auntie Mary.
Right, come on.
Mary be stepping, okay?
you knew she
But
had
it
to have them thigh-high boots.
right, and
Epic.
that was very weird because they are East Coast. Like Mary J. Blige was, with Diddy and Biggie, East Coast. So it was like, But what I do, and it might be the symbolism, is that, back in the 90s, East Coast versus West Coast, it got real bad. Real bad. So it might have been mending the fences of like, we as a rap community have come together because we have other people trying to diminish our worth. We are coming together. And so I really loved seeing that as a whole. But I'm just saying it was good. And when No More Drama, let me just tell y'all, No More Drama by Mary J. Blige was my anthem since I was like 3. Okay. No More Drama. Like I was in it. And then she fell out. Loved it. Also, let's give our kudos to Mr. Kendrick Lamar. Pulitzer Prize.
There it is. That was the first time a Pulitzer Prize winning artist, composer, whatever, performed in the Super Bowl since the 80s, 90s?
What was the last one?
That's
I don't know. I thought I saw something on the.
Because I don't know any others.
I'll look up while y'all keep talking.
I don't know any others, but all I do know is that I thought the lineup was great. Kendrick Lamar being a Pulitzer Prize winner, Dr. Dre being a billionaire. I mean, first of all, can we talk Beats by Dre?
Beats by Dre.
That he sold to Apple for over $1 billion. Like, come on. Snoop Dogg. I think they said like all of them in total have 46 Grammys, 21 Billboard #1 albums.
Yep.
Like, come on. Talk about a cast that it's established. They're all established. I mean, you can go on any of them, but look, overall, it was for the culture. It was.
And it was one of the most historically recognized Super Bowl halftime shows that we have ever gotten, may ever get, depending on how people react to this one, because there were already people having comments, like you were saying, about, I don't know if I really liked it this year. I was confused.
Well, guess what? We didn't say no when Coldplay was up there.
Right.
We didn't say nothing when Shakira and J-Lo was up there.
Now that one, cut.
Ooh.
Cut.
So why are we saying this now? And like, you were making this a statement. Like you are making this to be something more than what it is, because it is something that you don't prefer.
Exactly. It's not centered on things that they like.
And I just personally feel like if you didn't like it, guess what? Turn the TV.
Turn it. Or learn about something.
Or like learn.
That Kendrick Lamar set, he really came out here and he was giving what it was supposed to give.
I agree. I think I personally think every single performer gave what they needed to give.
I
from Dr. Dre to Snoop Dogg, also 50 Cent, Mary J. Blige, Kendrick, Eminem. If you didn't see Anderson .Paak playing the
drums,
the drums during Eminem, and so let's speak on this Eminem kneeling thing. Let's talk about that, because that was a big thing. Even the former mayor of New York, Rudy Giuliani, had something to say about it. Like, he's not in hot water with his best friend Donald B. whatever, Mr. Donald. So I don't know why he's speaking like he's not going to go to prison anyway, but he's speaking on that. Like, so the kneeling.
this is so interesting to me because the reason why people were so up in arms about Colin Kaepernick was the fact that he was kneeling during the national anthem, correct?
Correct.
Was
Correct.
Eminem kneeling during the national anthem?
No, that's why because remember, I didn't see it during the time, but I saw tweets and that was like, he's kneeling, yada, yada, yada. And I was like, I thought he was doing halftime. When was he kneeling during the national anthem? Like
Exactly.
I thought Miss Whisper singer herself, Janae Aiko. Ooh.
And this also was a thing that a lot of people was like, was that by happen chance or was that planned?
It was planned. It was planned.
In the moment, no one knew.
Exactly.
Right. If it was me, he got all that money and stuff, I would have played a little track of the national anthem right then. Throw it in the little piano and then leave right back out.
The NFL commissioner, he said it was planned. Like they saw it there, and that's what Rudy Giuliani, he was talking about. Like the NFL has went against police, and even said the radical, I think he said radical cop killing Black Lives Matter movement.
That's what they see it as. It's what they see it as. They see everything that happens as political now. You can take a knee for during whatever song or in protest of whatever, and it's automatic. Like it's already said what you are doing, no matter what, right? It doesn't even matter if you're disrespecting the flag or disrespecting the anthem. And now it's become this whole thing. So he didn't have to do it, right? Eminem didn't have to do it. But the big thing that people are still like not letting go, they're like, listen though, run Colin Kaepernick his money, run him his coin, run him what he deserves, because the amount of his name has been dragged through these streets, through the mud for everything that people are trying to do now. So I'm like, listen, me and the NFL, first of all, I don't care, not one bit. It could go away and I wouldn't give one crap about it. But the fact especially that they did that to him, and then have the nerve to have all these amazing halftime players and then Eminem doing all this stuff, I'm like, you know what?
Run me my reparations.
Run him his reparations. That's what I have to say about it.
And it's funny because the NFL evidently is not seen in good lights on both sides. I mean, Rudy Giuliani is talking about, the NFL is just purporting, Black Lives Matter movement. But then on this side is like, well, first of all, they over here still not even speaking to Colin Kaepernick. So what are you talking about? So, I see that they're trying to tread the fence lightly because they don't want to lose fans, because they lose fans, that means losing money. But I mean, Eminem did what he did, and that was that. I mean, I know some LGBTQ people might wonder why Eminem was there, but you know what? Let me just say this. If you're going to go for him, you better go for all of them, because they all have done something in the past. You got to remember, rap has, I love me some rap, but rap has not always been kind to LGBTQ, especially Black LGBTQ, or honestly, women's rights.
Yep.
So we are not glorifying or over all of that. We understand that. But for the culture that we are living in today, that was a great representation of the culture. I mean, literally, if you want a political statement from this Super Bowl, the quote is, "We gonna be all right." Pulitzer Prize winning Kendrick Lamar. We gonna be all right. And that's that.
Yep, he was the first Pulitzer Prize winner. There was a lot of posts that said probably. Oh,
he was. So, no. So let's let Kendrick actually take us over to our interview with our amazing guest, Dr. Anna Alonso-Minutti. Get ready for this, y'all. This one's good. See y'all over there.
All's my life I has to fight. All's my life I. Hard times like yeah. Bad trips like yeah. Nazareth, I'm on one, you on one. God got us, we gon' be all right. Ho! We gon' be all right. We gon' be all right. Ho! We gon' be all right.
Today we are joined by one of my favorite professors in the world. I'm not just saying that because she gave me an A. Dr. Ana Alonso-Minutti, the Associate Professor of Musicology and Ethnomusicology at the University of New Mexico. It's so great having you here today, Dr. Minutti.
Thank you.
And for everyone, so I took a class that was rooted in feminism and music within the University of New Mexico. And I took it with Dr. Minutti. And this class was so interesting to me because of all the social aspects we got to talk about in with music, if that makes sense, or in parallel to music, and how music and like society can reflect each other. And that's basically everything we talk about here on Relative Pitch. So this just made so much sense. But Dr. Minutti also brings a very interesting perspective that none of us really have, of being like an international like educator and also like researcher. And Dr. Minutti, you're not even with us this year at University of New Mexico. Where are you? What are you up to?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. I'm so proud of the work that you have been doing, because this is so relevant and so needed. So Anthony and Michael and Lauren, thank you for doing this. So I just wanted to start with that. And yes, I am in sabbatical. So for people who don't know how sabbaticals work, like most universities, not all, but most universities in the US have this system that full-time professors get some time off after a period of full-time work. Like for instance, after 6 full years of work, you get a semester of paid sabbatical. Usually that is so that faculty can focus on the research fully and not so much on teaching, even though I still do mentoring and advising while I'm on sabbatical. So I took the full year, and I am right now in Mexico, in a small city called Atlisco, which is nearby the city of Puebla, which is kind of like 2.5 hours away from Mexico City, the capital. And this is my parents' house currently, and that's the piano that I started learning piano, and I started my music studies, even though this is not the house that I started playing piano, but this is where my parents live now. I'm visiting them, but I've spent time also in other places, other countries and other cities. So my plan was to spend my entire year outside of the US, reconnecting with my Spanish background, my Spanish language, which is my first language, and my family and my research.
Yeah, no, that's for me, that's so amazing to like have professors who are still currently, you can see the work that they're doing out in the field. Because for me, that's like even more inspiring, I think, than even having you in the classroom, is getting to see, or maybe it's both. Maybe it's like having you as a professor and then seeing you out in the field continuously doing research and doing all the things that you're like teaching in your curriculum. And that's something that, I mean, I'm seeing for them a lot. I think especially during COVID, I think a lot of teachers and professors are utilizing that time to kind of, like you said, like get back in touch with maybe their roots of where they were raised and what got them into their field. And so that's really interesting. And speaking of COVID, like, because you have been, you know, away from the US for a while now during sabbatical, how has the situation with COVID like been where you are compared to what's happening over here?
Yeah, you know, COVID obviously changed globally the way we live, right? But yeah, for me, it has been super interesting to really see the impact of COVID in communities and countries outside of the US. And not necessarily because I already kind of like knew what the impact in the US has been, because actually New Mexico has been very particular in the way that they have handled as a state COVID, which in my view has been actually very efficient. Like, I don't know, Lauren, if when you got your vaccines, but like I got my first vaccine as early as like, it was early March 2020.
Yes.
So, and that was remarkably like in the early side of history of, you know, availability of vaccines elsewhere. So I was very lucky. We were very lucky, right? But because we had that privilege, right? Because it is a privilege. We had that privilege of having free access to vaccines and top-notch vaccines, right? Then, you know, personally, I took that as also like a huge responsibility, right? So for instance, like I was the kind of person who never left my house for like a year and a half, basically. And I was very careful in how I interacted with other people, where I interacted with other people. And I was thinking about, for instance, my parents in Mexico, and I was thinking how they didn't have access to vaccines for a lot of 2020, I believe, and into 2021, I think. So like that gave me like a sense of, okay, you know, like because I know that in other parts of the world this is not even possible, like I'm gonna do my best to be healthy and to keep the ones around me healthy.
Yeah.
So that mindset kind of like allowed me to be more aware of the asymmetries of COVID life globally, right? Like we get so immersed in what the U.S. politics are about masks and about masks and vaccines, and if you want to get the vaccine or what you know, all that stuff that is always in the news, in the U.S. news, that we kind of like we need to take a step back and actually even see like how's the world like even dealing with these issues, because frankly in our fields it's not only, you know, US born people that we're working with and that we're in communication and collaborating with, like especially COVID brought up like the possibilities of collaborating with the world, like of having meetings and colloquia and even concerts, like virtual concerts with people from all over the world. But we can't assume that our experience in the US living with COVID is the same as the experience of someone living, for instance, I don't know, in Costa Rica or in Puerto Rico or in Argentina or in Cuba or even in Europe or in Asia, right? Or in Africa. We just can't, right? So yeah, I mean, bringing back to your question, I've spent time in well, I came to Mexico first, and then I spent time in Costa Rica, and I did like a 1 month residency there. And it's interesting because even before traveling, you know, guys, how like we got as I said, I was so responsible with the COVID thing that I didn't want to take a plane, not only for my own sake, but again, like for the sake of others. So for a long time, I was like thinking, I don't know, like ethically, if I should go to Costa Rica, because again, I'm going with my vaccine, you know, and I'm going with everything. But like, so I was talking with my collaborators in Costa Rica, and I was saying, you know, how things are there, like in terms of COVID, blah, blah, blah. And then they were like, you know what, life goes on. That's all we can do. Like, this is, I mean, we have other sicknesses to worry about. You know, access to education, access to health has always been an issue. So like, it's another reality, right? So COVID is just one more thing, and work doesn't stop because finances, you know, I mean, money is, I mean, people need to have, you know, means to bring food to their homes, right? So that yeah, it was interesting. It was very interesting to me to see how they were welcoming me, because they assumed that, okay, that I was going to get plugged in and do my thing along with everybody else. And of course, we were super careful of wearing masks. Like, you know, in every place, like they had like washing hands stations. Like even outside of the School of Music, they had like several washing hand stations and hand sanitizers and things like that. And anyways, so all this to say that gave me a sense of like, yeah, musicians, they were still doing their thing. And because, you know, performing arts have suffered so much in COVID, but again, like you do what you have to do and you find ways to do it, being responsible, of course, but like doing the thing.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And with that, because one thing that you said earlier about reconnecting with your culture and going back, can you explain to like the importance of that? Because we've talked about on here, like for our culture, it is so great when I hear like music that represents the culture that, you know, I grew up in. And so, but you actually have the opportunity to go back to where you grew up and just getting back there. So how important is that? And what are some things that you have like learned from this experience?
Yeah, that's a very nice question because obviously people like to talk about their upbringing, or at least I do because I had a happy upbringing.
Yeah.
That's another privilege, I have to say. I
Mhm.
mean, we have to always be aware of our privileges. And I did have a happy childhood, and things were provided for me as a child. Basic needs, including, a stable family, which again is a privilege, and including food and a roof, right, under my head. So I don't take those for granted, and I consider myself very privileged. But yeah, as someone who had to leave their home country, Mexico, in order to pursue the academic degree that I wanted, that at that point in time was not available nowhere in my country. I took that decision, but that didn't imply like disconnecting, right, from where I am, from my family, from my roots. And in fact, I don't know, Lauren, if I ever said this in class, but maybe I didn't. But it's funny because when I came to the US to pursue a PhD, frankly, I never thought that I would stay and be a professor in the US.
You did mention that, yeah.
I did mention, okay. So, and I say this because sometimes the assumption as international scholars, especially as international scholars of color, the assumption is that, we come to the US and we want the full quote unquote American dream, and that we make it if we actually get a tenure track position in the US.
Yeah.
But frankly, that was not my objective. That was not my goal. In fact, I went to the US to get my PhD in musicology, and my thoughts were to go back home. I knew that I wanted to be a university professor, and I knew that was going to be kind of like my vocation, like my life vocation. But I didn't necessarily want to be in the US. I wanted to go back to Mexico. But the reality, again, talking about realities, the reality was that when I graduated from my PhD and I started to kind of like see what job opportunities were for me in Mexico, I didn't find any. And it was a matter of practicalities, right? Like, okay, I have a job offer at the University of North Texas in Denton, or I go to Mexico with nothing and start looking for something with nothing. So, it's basically a matter of, taking the decision that made sense at that point. And then one thing led to another, and I was at UNT, and then now I am at UNM. But anyways, all this to say is that because I was at UNT for some years, and then I came to UNM, and I had been in UNM for some years, I didn't get to have this sabbatical until basically 13 years of full-time teaching, which is almost double the time, as I was telling you, as all the professors, usually 6 years and then your sabbatical. So I really, really, really needed some time to connect again with my country, but not only with my country, but like with my language. Because for international scholars and students whose first language is not English, it's very tiring to think and perform and teach and write in a language that still like is not the first language, right? Like I learned English basically as an adult. So it is tiring. So I really wanted to go back because, guys, I also started to see how I was kind of like losing my Spanish. So I was saying things that didn't even make sense. So I needed to basically be back and reconnect and start thinking and dreaming and writing and like communicating in Spanish. So therefore, here I am. And also that has given me mental space, frankly, because I don't have to like simultaneously translate all the time. So that frees the space and it actually eases the stress. Which, as I also covered in class going for me, and I know that this is a topic that you guys have covered in your podcast, how rest is so important for us. And for people of color, it's not just important, but it's vital. It's a radical act. Like taking time is a radical act, and it is, it's survival.
Yes.
So
The what you just said, first of all, it speaks a lot because I learned this in college really was the importance of just going back to family or things because as I learned being in college and being away from family, it was like I've I've like forgot the isms that was culturally is what we did as I grew up in family. So then I would take a weekend to go back with my parents, and we're from South Georgia, so like the country isms come back in and everything, and it really is like putting your mental state at rest and you're back well. So when you go back off, like you're ready for it. And so what you just said spoke volumes. So thank you so much for saying that.
This is really interesting because a lot of what you just talked about, I feel like I hear in conversations when people talk about code switching, and like what the roots of code switching are. And like, so Michael's face just went, huh? No. So like, Michael, it's like whatever you would call home, right? And you would talk to Nana Papa and your accent would get thick as I don't even know what. Like, it would just become a thing because you were talking to your family and you knew how they talked, and so you would, and I get it. I do the same thing. I go home and I come back and I sound I sound like I'm from South Carolina again. Like,
Yes,
and y'all
yes.
make fun of me for it.
But it's the Diddy version. You ain't the full country version.
Whatever.
Right.
It's like South Carolina light.
Not diet South Carolina. Oh my
Right,
God.
it is.
So like that was such an interesting conversation because not only just talking about accents but also just language in general, and like I didn't even think about that of how difficult that transition must have been to going from speaking, writing, just being in a Spanish culture to now being just fully in the US. And like none of us, I'm sorry, like our education system does not set us up to actually speak other languages. It's like a check like mark on a box in education for us, which is so unfortunate. And so I wanted to know like a little bit more talking about, so code switching, when it comes to code switching, a lot of the time when I talk about it, it's like we all have this idea that we have to sound a certain way, or we're like kind of appealing to a certain idea of what an educated or someone who's in academia is supposed to sound like. And this kind of goes into like colonialism, right? And like this idea of what we're trying to seem like and who we're trying to compare ourselves to. And we talked a lot about that in class, in your class. And I love that because it was so eye-opening, because it's not even something you may even notice you're doing until someone points it out in a way, right? But then you talked about it, especially when you were mentioning how you stayed over here not because you really wanted to, but it was because you had to, right, for your career and for what you wanted to do. And so there's a lot I encapsulated in that. But can you speak on the idea of colonialism and how it affects especially your field of music?
yeah, of course. And I really like that you guys tackle these topics that are frankly like so difficult even to address, and address outside of the classroom, right? Because I mean, this is not supposed to be like an academic podcast. This is like supposed to be like a daily life, kind of like what we talk with the friends and what we're concerned about that affects our lives. So yes, I mean, definitely. Yeah, so language, right? Language in relation to colonialism, right? And how even we don't even think how we treat language. We're still operating within this colonial mindset. So I'll speak about that, and I'll speak from my experience, right? Because it's not a lecture on colonialism or decolonialism, but yeah, I mean, for instance, one thing that I'm sure that you talk about here is racism, right? And how, usually everybody will say that they don't want to be racist, right? And everybody will say that they want to be colorblind, but I'm sure that you have unpacked, the racist, under message in the color blindness, right? But another thing is how this, there's layers of discrimination that are placed upon like how we hear each other speaking, right? Like these accents, ways of like vocabulary. I mean, if even in let's say English native speakers, right? Like how you treat differently certain people just because of how they talk, what language they use, what kind of like slangs or what kind of accent, right? Well, even more so when you start listening to non-English native speakers, immediately I can see, like when I came to the US, like I could see how people's faces change. Like, okay, they see you and you look a certain way. And of course, there's all sorts of filters happening, right? Color and race and ethnicity. And there's all sorts of assumption uh, put on you in how you look. But another thing is how of discrimination, right? So for instance, like, talking about intersectionality, right? That is a concept that I don't know if you guys have talked about, but it can really cringe out. And anyways, race, class, gender, etc., how they intersect. But yeah, like for instance, for professors in academia, or not even professors in academia, but even like professional musicians, right? Women of color. We have the gender bias there. We have the race bias there. But then the other thing is when your accent communicates that you're not from there, you're not from, let's say, the US, as English speaking land, then the assumption is that you don't even know what you're talking about. That why to listen to you, and this is reflected in how, for instance, I can tell you guys that this has been reflected in things that you might not even think about, but like student evaluations. Like, I don't know how many times I have gotten this comment from students saying, we can't understand her. Or, or like, for instance, her instructions are not clear. And of course, they don't say because English is not her first language, but it is totally implied. Now, it is true, of course, it is true that, and Lauren, you might remember this, it is true that sometimes, because I'm constantly translating, I don't use grammar correctly 100% of the time, but I try to provide an atmosphere of, okay, you guys, ask me if I'm not being clear, please ask me, and I will repeat. I have my PowerPoint with some things written always, so that if I am not understood, there's a PowerPoint there that might clarify things. So anyways, but that also goes into, like, for instance, like faculty peer evaluations. Like, I've also gotten comments when, let's say, supervisors come and observe my classes, and I'm giving lectures on, let's say, like 14th century polyphony and isorhythmic motets, and I'm giving these like elaborate lecture, and this is actually a true story. And then the lecture ends, and the comment that I get from a supervisor is, oh, I can't believe how you people can lecture in English. And I have just spent like an entire hour elaborating, my knowledge in 14th century polyphony, and all the comments I have are, okay, your English is not that bad,
Wow.
So anyways, all this to say that I do think that one of the many strategies of decolonizing education, decolonizing music studies, decolonizing the self, is again to be aware of different ways of communicating, right? And to have the openness and the patience to listen, to truly listen. We're musicians, we have trained ears, but sometimes we're the worst at listening to people. And again, this act of listening actually is not just a matter of the ear, it's a matter of the body. Like, we listen with our bodies, with our entire bodies. So that's how we need to get attuned with each other, not only in a communicating, like verbal communication level, but in a physical level, like how we use our body language. What can we infer from each other's body languages? How do we feel about personal space and about proximity? You don't have to be like 1 centimeter from the other person to feel close to that person, right? But there's an attitude, right? So all those things, of course, are part of what I think is that the colonizing process that we should be like working towards, right? So it all starts also with this dichotomy of mind and body, right? Like, and the hierarchy that we place on mind upon body and soul and spirit, right? And this time has given me also the chance to kind of like balance them out better, right? And to have a better sense of how to feed my soul, feed my spirit. In this case, for instance, feed my Spanish speaking and thinking and over the English, no, and not have that hierarchy because it's so hierarchical in U.S. academia. Like for instance, even students, like you said, students sometimes they're not expected to learn other languages, and therefore students are very reluctant to read sources that are not in English, right? But I mean, we should get over it. We don't need to kind of like learn another language to actually kind of like browse through texts and try to figure it out and have like your phone right there and a dictionary and like find the keywords and just figure out what's the text about.
Fun fact, I just did that with my program notes. That I'm playing a piece by Santiago Baez, and he's not a well-known composer for the trumpet, but there's some works that never knew he had for brass quintet, trumpet, all these brass instruments. And the only document I could find about the piece I'm playing was in Spanish. And I all I can tell you from Spanish is how to say the alphabet with the YouTube clip. That's all I remember learning in my 2 semesters in high school. That's it. It wasn't, couldn't speak it. I bet this alphabet sounds awful. It's like some weird southern way of speaking Spanish. But yeah, I sat there for hours and I was like, what does this word mean? Okay. What is this object? Ooh, it was, but like, you learn more. And when you appreciate what you learn, if you have to sit through, it's like people like, oh, if you don't know every Mahler term, then why do you have any business playing Mahler? Well, I'm playing a Toru Takemitsu piece. He's Japanese. The source I found for him was in Japanese. If I could not, and I had to learn like word by word how to read it. So why are we expected to learn like Mahler stuff and all this German and all this European things, but we won't take the time to create real program notes if it's not in our language or in a language that we were classically trained to learn. So, hashtag tear it down.
So I think one of the last things that I would like to ask is actually if you could give us some definitions. So a lot of people are, I would say in the past couple of years have been hearing all of these different theories. And so from a professor, what would be your definition of queer theory, critical race theory, so that our audience really get to know what these are? And a caveat to that, a lot of people, whenever they hear these terms, they automatically go into a defense. Like they're automatically ready to fight about critical race theory should not be taught in schools, but they don't even know what it actually means. So if you could give us the definition of queer theory, critical race theory.
Or even how you in your mind define that, or how you teach like critical race or queer theories.
Yeah, and again, I totally hear you because I mean these terms. I mean, yes, in a way. I mean, this is super interesting because this also makes us aware that every single word that we speak has a history, right? And every term, every concept, every ideology has a history for eternity, right? But these terms are useful, right? Like, or can be useful, have the potential to be useful. And how we use them is what matters, right? Like even the term that I was speaking before, decoloniality, like it has been so used and overtly used and misused. And the same with the concept of race or queerness. They have been misused as well. So yeah, so critical race theory. I mean, yes, and these theories. I mean, some scientists might tell you, oh no, those are no theories because theories are in the hard sciences, right? But like we're talking about humanities, right? We're talking about the humanities fields, and in humanities we build theories that allow us to explain things, right? So critical race theory, of course, I mean, the term itself, I think that goes back to, I believe, the 70s. And it has to do with the work of Kimberly Crenshaw and others, I think Delgado, and I don't remember who else, right? But like it started in a particular context, I mean, a particular discipline, I think it was law, I mean, the legal field. But then, it expanded to other fields, right? Because that's what theories do. I mean, if they are useful, then they start being applied by other fields. So in the case of critical race theory in education, right, or in music, I mean, it's a way of understanding, first of all, that the concept of race is socially based. It's a social construct that is not something kind of like that is tied to the biology and to the way we are and to the way things are, and that because it's being socially constructed, that there are again hierarchies that are structural, that there are power structures that operate in the basis of what race you are perceived to have, actually. Or, and in the US, for instance, it talks about, again, the long history of colonialism, which is tied to racism, which is tied to slavery, which is tied to, again, discrimination based on skin color, right? So it is, I believe, the theory is very useful in education because it allows the students, first of all, to have an awareness of, things are not equal. Unfortunately, things are still not equal. So it's not that we can just disregard that because it's uncomfortable to talk about it. No. There's still, inequalities that we need to address, and we need to work against inequality, right? So yeah, that's what I believe critical race theory has an integral part in education. However, you might not even want to use the term, but if you practice the premise, then you're doing the work, right? I mean, like, I don't know if a 5-year-old will understand what critical race theory is or needs to know like those terms, but if you explain in actions like the concepts behind, then you get the point across. The same with queer theory, right? Like another thing about our consequences of colonialism is to have this notion that the norm is heterosexuality, and that heteropatriarchal models are the norm, and that there's only one way of being sexual. There's only one way of being of understanding gender and of understanding who we are as sexual beings, and that there's a right and wrong, right? And again, those things are consequences of colonialism or colonial thinking, right? So again, like, queer theory opens up these challenging the norms, these challenging the normatives, and into really exploring what else is there, like, and the complexities of even like, what does it mean that, for instance, and in my case, that I consider myself a woman, what does that really even mean? The way that I think of myself as a woman is the same as perhaps Lawrence, maybe not. And that is okay. And there is a sense of, there is a critique that needs to happen in how that it starts with ourselves and how we perform gender. So the performativity of gender is something that is crucial to queer theory, right? And anyways, I can go on and on and on, but basically that's what I can say at this point.
No, and see, I'm glad that we got some breakdown, because I mean it gets, I mean, as a teacher and reading the news, a lot of parents are just upset. I don't want my child learning about this critical race theory and yada, yada, yada. Okay, well, I'm still going to teach that everything is not equal. I'm still going to teach that there are inequalities in education. How me working at a lower economic school, you are not going to have the same avenues as someone who goes to a more higher economic status. Also, that will deal with race, that will deal with all of this. I'm still going to teach that. Will I necessarily have to say critical race theory? No, but I'm still teaching you what the real world is. And this is what we're talking about. So I think a lot of people, when they just hear it, they automatically go into a defense. I've seen so many articles about that. So I'm just glad that you just kind of broke it down for all of us. Thank you so much.
Yeah. And this was so I feel like I'm back in class, and I'm like, just like, because it felt like this. It felt like we were having conversations, and the resources and context, how you would contextualize all these ideas and these theories, and every time we talked about it, I felt like I left with a deeper understanding of all of it, and I felt like I was like, I don't know, I was like learning more about just humanity in a way versus like just learning sense, but learning how they intertwine with each other. And so I'm just so thankful to have that, first of all, that you were there my first year, to have learned from you, and that I still have this connection to you, and I will always consider you a mentor. And I'm just so grateful that we could have you on. And if anyone wanted to kind of find out more, because you've done so much amazing research, how would they be able to find work you have done and that's out there published?
Thank you, Lauren, for saying that. And I feel the same. It's for me an honor to be considered your mentor, and it was an honor to have you in class. It really was. Yes. I'm getting emotional, which is good, because getting emotional is good too. So yeah, I mean, I have an academia.edu page where I have a bunch of texts that I have published, but basic information about me can be found in my UNM faculty profile page, and I do have a personal website that I am building, that is www.anaminuti.com, and I'm in social media as well. Yeah.
Yeah, we'll make sure to like have all that below as well, and for the videos, and when we share the video, we'll have your bio and all that information so they can find you. So it was such a pleasure. Thank you so much again for being with us today, and you guys make sure to go check out Dr. Minuti and all the amazing things she's doing, and we'll see y'all next week on Relative Pitch. Bye.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Bye bye.